Anne, thank you so much for joining me. I know you have a very busy working schedule, but I'm so grateful that you could just come and answer a couple of questions. So thank you so much. Now, the main bulk of what I'll ask you will probably be music related, but before we get there, I wonder, can you just tell us a little bit about your current role at Fidelity and perhaps a little bit about your career up to this point?
Okay, so I am the Chief Executive of Fidelity International. We're a big international financial services and investment management company. We operate in more than 25 different countries. We look after some 800 billion of US dollars of other people's money very, very carefully. I started life actually as an engineer, worked as an engineer for 6 years in research, then in technology consultancy, did an MBA, flipped unexpectedly into the finance and investment world, and basically worked my way up through it since then.
Wow. Now, I've been doing a bit of reading, and I see you have a little connection to the Scottish Chamber Orchestra. Is that right? And you're sort of keen on the arts and music in general. So can you tell us maybe a bit about your sort of musical interests?
Okay, so I probably even rewinding a little bit further back than that. So I studied music. I studied piano and cello and singing and recorder and various other things through school, as many people did, and sort of maintained an interest in music in general. I've always been involved in some shape or form. Scottish Chamber Orchestra, I was very privileged. I'm not directly involved with them anymore, but I was very privileged to be asked to join the board of the Scottish Chamber Orchestra some years ago, and spent a few years on that board, which was just fascinating. And it was great because I'd actually, in the very early days of the Scottish Chamber Orchestra, sat up watching them in the cheap seats, in my youth, and sort of have followed their progress all the way through. So that's how I got involved, and it's great to be involved in helping an organisation try and steer a course, as well as actually just sitting there and enjoying the wonderful, wonderful stuff that they produce that you can all listen to.
Now, obviously, we met through our wonderful choir at Fidelity, and I just wonder whether I'm interested to know a bit about the impact that you think sort of singing and perhaps music can have on a workplace.
I think it's really important. I mean, one of the most powerful things that music has is the ability to bring people together. There's that joy of the collective, that surge of um, positive emotion that you get from collective endeavor. That's whether it's a choir or a band or an orchestra, whatever it is. And there's something about that human connectivity. And of course, we all spend a lot of time in our workplace. So being able to create those connections in the workplace is really invaluable. And the wonderful thing about music is it cuts across age, it cuts across cultural background, it cuts across all sorts of different things. And in a workplace choir like Fidelity, we're really welcoming to people who've got some musical background, and we've got some professional musicians who come along and sing with us, as you know, who trained professionally, even though they might have changed careers since then. And then we've got people who've actually come to music rather late, who've never studied it even at school in any kind of formal way. And so it's a great bringer together of people, I think. And as humans, as humanity, that's a powerful thing.
So you mentioned the professional musicians involved, with us at Fidelity. So say, put yourself in one of their shoes, and say that you were sort of pursuing a career as a professional musician in 2022. Are there any kind of tips, maybe from the business world, from the finance world, that you might sort of tell them in order to guide their career, perhaps in the early days?
Oh, interesting. I mean, I don't know that I'm perfectly equipped to give a professional musician tips. I mean, we're in a strange and weird and wonderful world, especially over the last 2 or 3 years. I know with the pandemic, it's been really, really tough to be starting out. I think on a positive note, very well worth remembering that actually, I think people are listening to even more music than they ever did. I think music is more accessible than it has ever been. And so, the power and the importance of music is something that is central to many, many people's lives that you meet every day. So I think that's an important first thing to remember. I think you have to be very digitally literate if you want to set out as a professional musician. Actually, it's true for most people starting out today, but I think you have to be digitally literate. You have to figure out how to make the virtual world, the digital world, work for you, and be really imaginative and creative about it. And you see Lots of different ways of people doing that. And I think that's, that's fantastic. I think with music in particular, one of the challenges, and I've got quite a few friends who, are or have been professional musicians over the years. One of the things that is hard to maintain sometimes is the joy in music as a professional musician. And that might seem a strange thing to say, I know, but there is a blurring between personal enjoyment and professional endeavor. And it is very hard for a professional musician to keep those separate. So I think one really important tip is to keep the joy in it, because you bring huge joy to other people. And if you lose that feeling of joy, you maybe need to take a step back and do some serious reflection, because I love my job. Everybody needs to love their job. And so as a musician where it's very intense, remember how to keep that joy in there. I think it's also okay. I think musical training, the discipline you get from it, the persistency, the hard work, those are traits that are invaluable in many other roles as well. And if you lose the joy, or if you begin to feel that the life of a professional musician isn't for you, that's okay too. You can bring those skills into lots of other places too. And so, I think, I wish, I wish young musicians today every, good wish for success. But that persistency, that resiliency, that hard work, that training, that dedication, all of those skills, keep the joy with them as well. If you can bring them to a musical life and career, brilliant. If you end up doing different things with them, brilliant too. So I think that's the best I can do. I'm not sure I'm the best equipped, but that's some thoughts.
And that's a simply wonderful answer. And I imagine a lot of people will take a real great deal from that. So thank you. I just wondered, so looking at Fidelity and your sort of day-to-day activities, is there sort of, the well-being element in terms of staff? I just wondered whether you could talk a little bit about that, and whether you think we'll ever return to sort of fully occupied offices, or whether we'll always be in this sort of hybrid model, 80% in the office and perhaps some working at home, and how you think that might present difficulties for the sort of communication between home and office. I wonder whether you could just tell us a little bit about that.
We've been in a very stop-start world, and I think it's been quite hard for people to try and figure out what their new pace is, what their new cadence is of life, what their new routine is. And I think as humans, we do like an element of routine. We don't necessarily want it to be routine all the time, but people, I always used to observe this when my children were small, that actually children like to know what's coming next. They really do. They like a little bit of surprise, but don't want too much uncertainty in the world. And I think as humans, we're all a bit like that. So I do sense it, and we're back now, obviously towards the end of January, back in, opening the offices up again in line with the government guidance in the UK. We've maintained open offices in some other parts of the world. I feel a bit of a yearning from people for wanting to go back, wanting that connectivity. There is a fear factor as well. And, we're having to really think quite hard about how you respond to the yearning, but nonetheless acknowledge the fear. And not everybody's in the same place in both of those things. I think people will find a new cadence. I think it is a great, I think we've all learned that it's important to be in the office, but that you don't need to be in the office 5 days a week. And we've given people, you talked about well-being, for people with a long commute, to be able to work 1 or 2 days from home or whatever it might end up being. I think that's a good thing. But I think we do need to have enough coming together. And I think, just as I always remember, my dad telling me of what it was like when he first stopped having to work on a Saturday morning. All right, going from a 5.5 day week to a 5 day week. It's actually not that long ago. It was in the 60s that he stopped working a regular Saturday morning. And that was a civil service. That was an office job. So we will get used to a new shape that isn't 5+2, that is a new shape of what the working week is. And I think that will be a little bit easier once people have that regularity, but it doesn't need to be exactly the same cadence for everybody. But we're still in a transition state towards that again. And it's going to take us a while to just get used to that. But we will. We're adaptable. Humans are really adaptable. We'll get there.
I just wondered, music is obviously central here, and I wondered whether you had a particular favourite composer or sort of genre of music, or, your sort of desert island song that you would perhaps listen to. I don't know.
That is a totally impossible question to answer because I listen to different stuff at different times, and I wouldn't pick. I love classical stuff. I love music from some of the shows. I like Cole Porter. I like a bit of Ivor Novello. I love Mozart. I like Bach. But, I couldn't answer that. But I was thinking of what is my absolute earliest musical memory. And I'm going back to, I think I was probably about 3 or 4, certainly preschool. And for anybody watching who's ever had small children, that thing is where they appear at your bedroom door at kind of some stupid o'clock time in the morning, 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, and they sort of come in, they kind of burrow in under the covers. And I can remember doing that to my parents, and I was very, very small, and snuggling in between them, and asking my father they had for reasons I kind of look back and think that's a bit weird really, but they had one of these really ancient, well, about 100 years old now, sort of gramophone kind of things, sort of in the corner of the bedroom. And my favorite piece at that time was they had an old LP, a vinyl LP, that had Swan Lake on one side and had Sleeping Beauty on the other side. And it had a purpley, sort of lilac-y purpley cover with sort of vague ballet dancers and big tutus on it. And that's what they put on for me. And I would sort of lie there snuggled in listening to Swan Lake on one side and Sleeping Beauty on the other. That's probably my earliest musical memory.
Wonderful. And very evocative. You can sort of, you sort of picture the thing, and all that vinyl technology seems very behind us now, with all the digital, streaming services and all of that. But alas, yeah. And I think we're sort of drawing to a close, but I wonder whether, for the benefit of any sort of musicians out there, perhaps jobbing musicians, going from gig to gig, could you just sort of tell us a bit of a day in the life of a CEO? What's your sort of what's the kind of pattern of a sort of working day?
Goodness, there is no regular pattern. It is every day is a little bit different, but let me just try and give you sort of a mix of some of the things that are in there. There's kind of internally things and externally things. So look at the internally things first. There are kind of what we call the governance meetings. So, the kind of like, the executive committee meetings, the meetings with the sales teams, the meetings with the operations teams, thinking about what we're doing, thinking about strategy, thinking about tactics, dealing with problems, dealing with new business proposals, all of that kind of stuff. There's quite a lot of one-on-one conversations with people, just touching base. How are they doing? What are their immediate plans? Where are the difficult areas? So there'll be a bunch of stuff like that. There's thinking time. That's what I use music for quite a lot. It's just zone everything else out. You've got to find some thinking time. For me, that's quite often quite late at night because I'm a night owl. So that's often when I do my thinking and I draw my funny drawings. And then there's sort of externally facing stuff, which might be meeting with clients. It might be meeting with or listening to policymakers, regulators, central bankers, people who set interest rates, all of that kind of a stuff. And then there's a bit of sort of mentorship, sponsorship, thinking, talking to people about their careers, what they might do next. And then there's just all sorts of random stuff. So it's really hard to say this is what a standard day looks like. You're trying to, we've got 10,000 people-ish around the world. You're trying to keep people motivated. You're trying to look after our clients' money. You're trying to think about what we'll be doing. How are we doing it? Are we doing it in the right way? You're trying to spot problems before they occur. You're trying to solve problems once they've occurred. And you're trying to keep smiling and have a bit of fun along the way too.
And it sounds a remarkably busy life. And I'm very impressed and I'm very honoured that you could just give us a little bit of your time. So thank you so much.
Well, Ben, thank you. And can I just say, if anybody wants a wonderful choir director, music director for your workplace choir, Ben is brilliant, makes us laugh, gets a halfway decent sound out of us. So, we're privileged and honoured to have you to help us on our musical endeavours. So thank you.